The moment leadership became symbolic. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. The billionaire still appeared at conferences, still delivered keynote speeches, still signed off on major initiatives. The title remained. The respect endured. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, leadership had quietly transformed into something else. Something lighter, quieter, and far less powerful. This is how authority disappears in modern systems. Not through removal, but through preservation. Kept visible, kept ceremonial, kept alive just enough to be admired, but no longer relied upon. And in a world obsessed with continuity, symbolic leadership has become dangerously common. The billionaire had built an empire so large, so complex, that continuity itself became the priority. Investors wanted reassurance. Partners wanted predictability. Employees wanted stability. And so structures were created to ensure the company could function smoothly regardless of who stood at the top. At first, this felt like success. Decision frameworks expanded. Succession planning deepened. Committees gained authority. Everything was designed to protect the organization from disruption. The billionaire approved it all, proud to be building something bigger than themselves. The reveal began subtly. Major initiatives arrived fully formed before reaching the billionaire's desk. Presentations framed decisions as already aligned. Questions were informational, not decisive. When the billionaire offered direction, it was acknowledged, then integrated as guidance rather than command. Leadership still existed, but it no longer decided. The billionaire noticed a strange shift in language. People spoke about the organization's direction rather than your direction. Outcomes were justified by consensus rather than judgment. Authority had become contextual, relevant for inspiration, not instruction. The turning moment came during a public announcement. The billionaire stood on stage, unveiling a strategy that had already been finalized elsewhere. The applause was loud, the messaging flawless, but the realization landed heavily. They were announcing decisions they did not make. The role had changed. Leadership was no longer the engine, it was the emblem. And once leadership becomes symbolic, power does not vanish. It migrates. Quietly, permanently. The billionaire was still admired, but the future was being written without them. And the next realization would be harder still. Symbols cannot steer. They can only reassure. The migration of power accelerated in ways that were easy to miss but impossible to ignore once seen. The billionaire still attended meetings, still spoke with authority, still offered perspectives shaped by decades of experience. Yet decisions no longer bent toward those words. They passed through layers of process, alignment, and approval before settling somewhere else entirely. The reveal deepened when the billionaire began receiving updates instead of requests. Plans were shared after commitments were made. Timelines were announced rather than debated. The role of leadership had shifted from shaping direction to endorsing outcomes. Nothing was hidden. Everything was transparent. And that was the problem. Transparency had replaced trust. Executives explained that systems were working as intended. The company was resilient. No single voice could disrupt progress. The billionaire nodded, recognizing the logic and feeling the loss. Leadership had been protected so thoroughly that it could no longer intervene. The conflict sharpened during a moment of genuine uncertainty. A sudden geopolitical shift threatened the core market. Speed mattered. Interpretation mattered. This was not a scenario for prepared scripts. The billionaire offered a decisive course of action, grounded in experience the systems could not replicate. The response was courteous. Teams thanked them for the insight. Committees evaluated the recommendation. Risk officers reframed the proposal. And then the system chose a safer path. The billionaire watched the moment slip by, realizing something profound. Symbolic leaders are consulted during uncertainty, but never followed. Their role is to reassure stakeholders while systems decide what feels safest. The emotional weight settled heavily. The billionaire was no longer carrying responsibility for outcomes, yet still carried the visibility of leadership. Praise arrived without agency. Blame dissolved into structure. Authority had become a performance of continuity, rather than a force of decision. The breaking realization came during a private conversation with a senior executive who spoke honestly for the first time. "People feel better knowing you're here," they said. even when decisions don't come from you. That sentence defined everything. The billionaire had become a stabilizing presence, not a directing one, a symbol of the past guiding comfort in the present, while the future moved elsewhere. The empire no longer needed leadership to act. It needed leadership to exist, and that distinction carried a cost no ceremony could conceal. The conflict was no longer about reclaiming power. It was about whether leadership could still mean something real, or whether symbolism was a final stage before disappearance. The answer was approaching. The conflict reached its emotional peak when the billionaire confronted the full weight of symbolic leadership. It happened during a crisis simulation, a carefully designed exercise meant to test readiness for the unexpected. Scenarios were projected, responses outlined, communication chains mapped. When asked to make the final call, if the system failed, the room went silent. Then someone spoke. The protocols would determine the response. The billionaire felt the truth land, like a quiet collapse. In the moment where leadership should have mattered most, it had been replaced by procedure. Authority existed in name only, preserved as reassurance while responsibility lived elsewhere. The emotional toll was profound. The billionaire realized they were no longer trusted to decide under pressure, not because they were incapable, but because the system was designed to remove reliance on any individual. Leadership had been converted into continuity. Something to be seen, not something to be used. The breaking point arrived during an unscheduled disruption. A sudden technical failure rippled across multiple divisions. The moment demanded immediate judgment. The billionaire acted instinctively, issuing clear direction. The response was confusion. Teams hesitated, unsure whether the instruction aligned with protocol. Approval was sought. Time slipped. The failure escalated. Afterward, reviews concluded that the response lacked alignment with established processes. No one mentioned leadership. No one mentioned hesitation. The system had worked exactly as designed, even as the outcome worsened. The billionaire understood then that symbolic leadership is not neutral. It is dangerous. It creates the illusion of guidance while removing the ability to guide. It comforts stakeholders while leaving organizations exposed in moments that cannot be scripted. The role of leadership had been preserved, but its function had been hollowed. The realization was painful but clarifying. Leadership is not presence. It is not visibility. It is not reassurance. Leadership is the right to decide when systems fail, and that right had been quietly removed. The billionaire stood at a crossroads no ceremony could resolve. Continue as a symbol, admired, safe, powerless, or confront the truth that leadership, once reduced a ritual, no longer serves a future. The next move would not restore control. It would redefine what leadership meant, or accept its end. And in that decision, an era would either be reclaimed or allowed to fade entirely. The climax arrived when the billionaire chose to confront the illusion head-on. In a private session with the board and senior leadership, they spoke without ceremony, without performance, without symbolism. They named what everyone felt but avoided. Leadership had been preserved as an image, while decision-making had been quietly outsourced to systems never meant to carry moral weight. The billionaire did not demand power back. They demanded clarity. Either leadership would carry real authority in moment of uncertainty, or the role would be acknowledged for what it had become. Ceremonial continuity, designed to soothe, not steer. The room reacted with discomfort. Some argued that removing individual authority reduced risk. Others defended the protocols as necessary protection. The billionaire listened, then delivered the truth no framework could absorb. Systems manage the predictable. Leaders exist for the unpredictable. Without the right to decide when models fail, leadership becomes theater. And theater does not save organizations when reality breaks the script. The decision that followed was definitive. The billionaire announced a transition, not away from leadership, but away from symbolism. Emergency authority would be clearly assigned. Decision rights would activate when uncertainty exceeded models. And if the organization was unwilling to accept that responsibility, the billionaire would step aside entirely rather than pretend to lead. Silence filled the room. That silence forced honesty. The structure was revised, not dismantled, but corrected. Protocols remained, but no longer replaced judgment. Leadership was no longer ornamental. It was conditional, activated by consequence. The empire did not become reckless. It became responsive. The resolution unfolded with quiet intensity. Teams adjusted. Decision-making regained edge. When uncertainty arose, hesitation shortened. The organization learned again what it meant to follow, not blindly, but decisively. The billionaire felt something return that had been missing for years. Weight, not the weight of ego, the weight of responsibility. Leadership, they realized, is not about being seen. It is about being answerable when no one else can be. The empire moved forward leaner, clearer, more honest about where authority truly lived. And the billionaire, no longer a symbol, stood once again as a steward, not protected from consequence, but entrusted with it. Because leadership does not end when power fades. It ends when no one is willing to carry the cost of deciding. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The